I've never really felt the need to go and party, and certainly going to Jeffrey's was not about partying. Absolutely.
Prince Andrew is demanding a trial by jury and has formally denied all the allegations against him as he gave a court in New York his official response to allegations of sexual assault.
I've never really felt the need to go and party, and certainly going to Jeff was not about partying. Absolutely not. Behind polished smiles and public bows, a former maid steps forward with a portrait of Prince Andrew no palace PR could hide. Her account peels back silk curtains to reveal petty cruelties, secret habits, and an entitlement that smoothed into habit over decades. Oh, in 2010 that there certainly wasn't a party to celebrate his release in December. Today, we piece together the testimony, the small moments that expose a larger truth about power and privilege, revealing private humiliations, whispered orders, and favors exchanged for silence. Prince Andrew is demanding a trial by jury and has formally denied all the allegations against him as he gave a court in New York his official response to allegations of sexual and ask what happens when servants speak and the crown's glossy image cracks. Let's uncover the undiluted truth. The valet who knew too much inside the royal estate long before the scandals and headlines. There was a quieter story unfolding behind closed doors. A story whispered among the people who serve the royals every day. Most outsiders would imagine palace staff as loyal, polished professionals who move with grace through marbled hallways. But the truth was far more complicated, especially for those assigned to work near Prince Andrew. They felt the tension more deeply than anyone, and some even carried private resentment they hardly dared voice. One of those voices came from a man named Paul, Prince Andrew's personal valet. He had served the prince for decades, living in an apartment directly connected to Andrew's own rooms. 4 years, he packed Andrew's clothes, arranged his belongings, and responded to his every demand. Behind the formal titles and polished shoes, however, Paul lived a very different reality. According to those who spoke with him, he absolutely loathed his job. Not because of long hours, but because of the prince's behavior. What made it worse was the small, almost unbelievable requests the prince would make. Andrew owned a Jack Russell Terrier named Bendix. An odd choice of name that people often found strange. But stranger still was Andrew's habit of waking his valet in the middle of the night whenever the dog stirred. At 2 or 3 in the morning, Andrew would press a private buzzer or ring a direct phone line that summoned Paul instantly. Paul would rush in half asleep, take the dog outdoors, and wait in the freezing dark, smoking a cigarette while trying to stay awake. These strange duties became nightly interruptions that left him exhausted and bitter. On certain nights, while palace security officers patrolled the gardens, they would cross paths with Paul, who often used those late moments to vent. He told them without hesitation that he despised the prince. His words were sharp, dripping with frustration, the kind that builds only after years of mistreatment. He said that Andrew was rude, demanding, and often cruel in ways that shocked even those accustomed to royal entitlement. At one point, Paul even joked darkly that he hoped the prince's upcoming ski trip would end with Andrew sliding off a mountain. The bitterness was that deep. But resentment didn't come from only one man. Many insiders believed Andrew had been allowed to misbehave for far too long. Some even said that if Prince Philip had intervened early, perhaps even shoved a bar of soap into his mouth the first time Andrew cursed at a servant, things might have turned out differently. Instead, Andrew grew into adulthood without boundaries, treated like someone who could never do wrong. Staff said openly that he was the Queen's favorite, a prince shielded from consequences in a world where hierarchy decided everything and hierarchy was everywhere. The palace did not operate like a normal workplace. It was more like a miniature kingdom within a kingdom. Staff were divided into 3 canteens. One for senior officials with French menus and white glove service. One for administrative workers and one for the lowest ranks, the maids and footmen who made do with microwaves and kettles. Even in the staff hallways, people walked with a silent understanding of where they stood in this rigid order. Those who joined young often stayed their entire lives. The royal household became their world, their family, their identity. Loyalty wasn't just encouraged. It was built into the walls. And that loyalty meant something dangerous. No matter how badly Andrew behaved, no one was going to challenge him. Not the footman, not the valet, not even the protection officers who traveled with him everywhere. They were staff, not friends. They were assigned to protect him, not question him. Which leads to a far darker question. One that insiders only dared whisper after everything came crashing down. If this was how he behaved inside the palace, what happened when no one was watching? Stay with us because what comes next takes you to a different shadow. The silence that protected him. The deeper you go into the royal household, the clearer it becomes that power doesn't just influence behavior, it protects it. By the time Prince Andrew reached adulthood, his world was arranged in such a way that every flaw, every poor choice, and every cruel remark simply slipped through the cracks. People saw, people whispered, but no one challenged him. And it was this environment of silence that would later raise troubling questions about the prince's life beyond palace walls. Protection officers who worked around him described their job as one of duty without judgment. They were the silent shadows, always present but never interfering. To outsiders, it might seem impossible that these officers didn't know every detail of Andrew's private life, but those inside the system understood the truth. A protection officer is not a confidant, no matter how casual the conversations or how friendly the smiles. They were staff. They didn't follow him into private rooms. And they didn't question where he went or why. Their job was simple. Keep him safe. Not keep him accountable. But even from a distance, they noticed clues. Small hints that something wasn't right. Odd travel plans, strange company, abrupt changes in routine. At the time, none of it added up. But looking back, some officers realized they might have been witnessing the edges of a much darker story. At the palace, staff loyalty acted like a shield, protecting not just reputations, but patterns of behavior. A maid might see something suspicious, but would never report it. A footman might overhear a disturbing conversation, but stay silent out of fear of losing the only life he had ever known. Senior officials, many of whom were retired military officers, viewed discipline as loyalty first, questions later. And above all of them stood Andrew, protected by rank, by heritage, and by a queen who loved him deeply. But even in this tightly controlled environment, the cracks were visible. People described him as childish, entitled, and unwilling to accept responsibility. His famous teddy bear incident, in which he demanded that staff arrange dozens of stuffed animals in a specific order every day, was just one example of a man who never outgrew his most immature habits. To many, he behaved less like a seasoned royal figure and more like someone stuck in emotional childhood. And when someone with that mindset is given unlimited, the results can be disturbing. Inside the palace, staff often asked quietly, who could possibly stop him? Discipline was soft, criticism discouraged, and consequences practically non-existent. Those who served him longest were often the most jaded, saying openly that he was the only royal who consistently created problems. Even among his siblings, his behavior stood out, leaving others confused at how he continued getting away with so much. This culture of silence didn't stay confined to palace walls. Eventually, it spilled into the outside world, especially when Andrew began forming relationships far beyond England. That's when whispers started turning into fear, when private concerns turned into public scandals, and when the prince could no longer hide behind the quiet loyalty of staff who had once protected him from everything, including himself. If that left you stunned, wait until you hear what an entirely different staff member confessed about him next. Prince Andrew unmasked. Charlotte Briggs once believed that serving the royal family would be the highest honor of her life. She imagined loyalty shaping character, kindness, awakening goodness, and respect flowing both ways. But nothing prepared her for the reality she walked into at just 21. What she thought would be a crown-polished dream turned into the kind of job no staff member wanted, a posting inside a palace where appearances sparkled. But the behavior behind closed doors was something else entirely. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, was not the charming public figure the world once clapped for. Behind Buckingham Palace's tall gates and immaculate corridors, he was known by those closest to him as rude, explosive, and startlingly entitled. And Charlotte, who entered his world hoping to serve with pride, was quickly confronted by a man whose temper could turn the smallest oversight into a full-blown storm. Years later, when she finally spoke out, her words carried none of the softness of someone trying to be polite. Her interview was sharp, honest, and fueled by experiences she could no longer bury. She said she didn't care what Andrew felt. She called him horrible, nasty, a man who made her cry more times than she could count. And as her testimony spread, the world got a rare look into the Duke as his staff knew him. Not the smiling royal and balcony appearances, but the impossible-to-please master who treated the people around him like props. Her earliest memories painted Andrew as a man who believed the world existed to serve him. He issued commands for tasks he could easily do himself, as though lifting a finger would insult his status. Curtains became one of his biggest obsessions. Not their color, not their fabric, but the tiny gap Charlotte once left between them. A difference so small it was barely visible. Yet it was enough to unleash one of his legendary outbursts. On that day he burst from his office, marched down the corridor, and screamed at her with language far beneath the dignity of a prince. His voice carried through the halls. Staff froze. Charlotte cried. And everyone was reminded that in Andrew's world, even perfection was risky. But the strangest part wasn't his anger. It was his demands. Peculiar rituals that bordered on childish but were enforced with military severity. His infamous collection of stuffed animals, 72 teddy bears, a hippo, and a black panther had to be arranged with exact precision. Laminated instruction sheets dictated their positions like a battlefield map. Charlotte even underwent full training on how to handle the stuffed toys as though she were preparing for palace security instead of soft toys on a bed. His bedroom was equally demanding. Pillows had to be centered to the millimeter. Pajamas perfectly aligned. The bears displayed during the day, removed at night, then restored at sunrise. Staff whispered among themselves, wondering what kind of adult required such rituals to function. But for Charlotte, it wasn't whimsical. It was exhausting. Every day felt like walking on glass. One wrong move and his temper cracked open all over again. Other servants confirmed the same pattern. Andrew barking orders to prove dominance, expecting worship without offering the slightest courtesy and belittling staff simply to remind them of their position. Unlike his siblings, Andrew carried no heavy royal burden. He wasn't destined for the throne. He wasn't flooded with responsibilities. Yet, he behaved like a king ruling over frightened subjects. Charlotte's story wasn't just about tantrums or teddy bears. It was about a man who enjoyed breaking people down, who crafted a workplace so suffocating that even a palace felt like a trap. And this was only the beginning. Actually, no, this was not the beginning. There was something about Andrew that even Charlotte knew. Let's explore the making of a prince. Andrew's childhood of cruelty. From the moment he could walk, people inside the palace whispered that something about young Andrew felt different. Not mischievous, not curious, but strangely unkind. While Charles buried himself in books and pushed through challenges with grit, Andrew moved through the royal corridors like someone who believed the world already belonged to him. Staff noticed it first in the smallest moments. The way he snapped for attention, the way he treated every room as a stage, and every person as someone he could command, tease, or break depending on his mood. Even as a toddler, he seemed drawn to cruelty the way other children were drawn to toys. Instead of giggling shyly near the Queen's guards, he strutted before them, pulling faces and mocking their stiff posture. When they stayed still, as duty required, he didn't lose interest. He grew furious. He pushed harder, trying to force them to react so he could feel triumphant. It was the first sign of a pattern that would follow him for years. If he couldn't win admiration, he would settle for domination. But it wasn't just people who suffered under his temper. Animals too became targets of his irritation and boredom. He kicked the family dogs when they didn't move fast enough, laughed when they yelped and hit the legs of horses with sticks just to watch them flinch. The grooms, usually silent and endlessly patient, reached a breaking point. One day, after he struck a horse one too many times, they dragged him to a manure pile and buried him in it head first. Harsh, shocking, unforgettable. But to them, it was the only language they felt he understood. Yet even that wasn't the worst of it. His bullying stretched into every corner of his young life. His younger brother, Edward, became a favorite victim, enduring schways, slaps, stolen desserts, and bruises no one dared question out loud. These weren't the rough games siblings play. They were contests Andrew had to win. Moments he used to prove his power over someone smaller and more gentle than himself. And the palace staff, they bore the brunt of it daily. One footman suffered so much taunting that he eventually snapped, landing a punch that left the young prince with a black eye. When he went to the Queen expecting dismissal, she shocked him. She refused his resignation. Even she seemed to understand that Andrew had pushed things too far, that the boy's behavior had twisted into something beyond childish mischief. School did nothing to soften him. At prep school and later at Gordonstown, classmates gave him cruel nicknames, not out of jealousy, but out of fear and frustration. He was known for tantrums, sneers, and laughter that always came at someone else's expense. Teachers described him as smug, entitled, and impossible to discipline. As he grew older, the behavior didn't fade. It sharpened. Stories circulated of him tugging at female staff members' clothes during palace events, smearing food on their faces, and barking vulgar orders at servants as if they existed purely for his amusement. During camping trips, he tore down other children's shelters, tossed their belongings into rivers, and watched their misery as if it were entertainment. Those who worked closest to him summed it up in one painful sentence. He wasn't raised like a prince. He acted like a tiny tyrant, throwing objects to the floor, cursing at staff, barking orders instead of speaking. His world seemed built on the belief that everyone else existed to serve him. And yet, as troubling as these stories are, they raise an even bigger question. Because when we shift from Andrew's early behavior to the men who served beside him, things become far more revealing. So, what truly sets Andrew apart from other working royals? Let's dive into comparing his behavior with that of other royal officers and discover why his conduct stands out as far worse. Keep watching. A royal contrast. Prince Andrew versus his siblings. In the labyrinthine world of the British royal household, not all royals are created equal in the eyes of those who serve them. Former staff repeatedly draw stark contrasts between Prince Andrew and his relatives, describing a level of entitlement and immaturity that made him uniquely difficult to work for. Whereas other members of the family earned respect and loyalty through fairness and decency, Andrew's behavior reportedly created tension and frustration at every turn. Prince Charles, for instance, was remembered by palace staff as consistently courteous, patient, and respectful of those who worked under him. Accounts describe him taking the time to acknowledge staff efforts, sometimes stopping to chat with him in hallways or on the lawns, offering simple words of appreciation. Even when he demanded long hours or meticulous standards, his tone was professional, not demeaning, and staff often left their duties feeling valued rather than demeaned. These gestures might seem small, but in a rigid hierarchical environment like the palace, they mattered enormously. They created a sense of dignity and mutual respect that flowed from the top down. Similarly, Prince Edward earned a reputation as approachable and considerate. Staff members have recalled feeling comfortable around him, noting that he rarely demanded unnecessary tasks or acted whimsically. He maintained expectations appropriate to his status, but avoided the unpredictable nighttime commands that reportedly became Andrew's hallmark. Where Andrew's valet might be roused in the middle of the night to take a dog for a walk or perform other unusual errands, staff working with Edward could generally anticipate a predictable, fair workload. These differences, though subtle, reveal a key distinction in leadership styles and personal character among the royals. Princess Anne, known for her strong work ethic, also earned admiration from staff. Her household reportedly ran with precision, but she treated employees as partners in service rather than as objects of whim or amusement. Former staffers often describe her as professional yet personable, someone who inspired loyalty through competence rather than fear or favoritism. Even in her demanding routines, Anne's fairness allowed her staff to feel pride in their work rather than anxiety about unpredictable behavior. By contrast, Prince Andrew reportedly left staff exhausted, frustrated, and sometimes humiliated. Former maids and valets describe his whimsical or childish demands like the infamous teddy bear arrangements or being summoned at 2 in the morning for trivial tasks as sources of constant stress. One former maid described working under Andrew as the only negative experience in her royal career, stating that he consistently ruined the atmosphere. Unlike his siblings and peers, Andrew's behavior seemed to stem from entitlement reinforced by lifelong privilege. A sense of being the Queen's favorite and a lack of boundaries during his upbringing. This comparison highlights that the palace system itself was not inherently oppressive. Many royals treated staff with respect even within the rigid hierarchy. It was Andrew's personal attitude and upbringing that created a uniquely difficult environment. While palace life demanded obedience and discretion, it also offered opportunities for fair treatment and mutual respect as evidenced by the experiences of those serving other family members. Ultimately, these contrasts paint a portrait not only of Andrew as an individual, but also of the broader dynamics within the royal household. Privilege can coexist with responsibility. Entitlement can be tempered by respect, and leadership within the family is defined as much by personal conduct as by title. Andrew's behavior, juxtaposed against the more considerate approaches of his relatives, underscores that the problem was never palace life itself. It was the choices and character of the prince in question. Beyond the domestic staff, what other allegations have emerged as a result of his troubling behavior? But just how deep does this conduct really run? Stay tuned as we uncover the untold stories. Allegations that shook Prince Andrew. From the very start, the stories about Prince Andrew went far beyond the palace corridors. While the early tales focused on staff, valets, maids, and footmen enduring tantrums, relentless demands, and cruel whims, a darker, far more serious narrative loomed in the shadows. Allegations of sexual misconduct and abuse would eventually grab international attention, revealing a recurring pattern. A man wrapped in privilege, unchecked power, and the silent obedience of those around him. Central to these serious claims is Virginia Yearey, who publicly accused Andrew of sexual abuse when she was underage. In her accounts and interviews, she detailed being coerced into encounters with the prince, including in the homes of notorious associates. The allegations have led to civil lawsuits and relentless public scrutiny despite Andrew's denials. Yet, the persistence of these claims highlights a troubling reality. Status, wealth, and connections created opportunities others could never access while limiting accountability at every turn. What ties these grave allegations to the day-to-day experiences of palace staff is a recurring theme. Power combined with protection breeds impunity. Staff were often expected to silently endure Andrew's childish or cruel behavior, aware that questioning a senior royal could threaten their positions or reputations. Valet, maids, and protection officers were trained to obey, not challenge. Loyalty was mandatory and fear of reprisal kept many silent. The same system that shielded him from accountability inside the palace mirrored the structures outside, allowing inappropriate behavior to go unchecked for years. Even minor grievances illustrate this pattern, ordering staff to arrange teddy bears perfectly, waking valets at odd hours, or mocking those who failed him. These acts seem trivial on the surface, but when viewed alongside the severe allegations, a disturbing continuity emerges. A personality accustomed to acting without consequence. Whims and desires could override the comfort, safety, and rights of anyone in his orbit. The palace's gilded walls concealed not just privilege, but a system that enabled wrongdoing to persist unchallenged. Staff testimonies and public allegations together reveal a man insulated by hierarchy whose behavior consistently exploited the gap between authority and accountability. The domestic stories, while not criminal, show early signs of a mindset where entitlement eclipsed empathy and status outweighed morality. When these patterns expanded into high society, the consequences became far more serious, with silence, protection, and social influence masking harm from public view. In connecting domestic staff grievances with wider misconduct claims, a clear picture emerges. Prince Andrew's behavior was not isolated, impulsive, or misunderstood. It was nurtured in a culture of unquestioned loyalty, fear, and institutional shielding. Every demand, prank, and cruel jest within the palace mirrors the same dynamic that allowed greater misdeeds to occur beyond its walls. Now, how did loyalty, fear, and layers of protection turn Andrew from a spoiled royal into someone emboldened by impunity? Stay glued as we unravel this complex web. How the palace cultivated Andrew's entitlement. Inside the royal household, loyalty is more than a virtue. It is an unspoken law, a binding force that shapes every interaction and decision. For many palace staff, their lives became inseparable from their service. Young recruits often began in their late teens, dedicating decades to the household. Work, identity, and financial stability were intertwined so tightly that leaving, questioning, or even hinting at discomfort could risk everything they had built. The palace was not merely a workplace. It was their entire world, and within it, loyalty was the currency that kept them alive. Insiders described this world as one ruled by both loyalty and fear. Staff were trained not just to serve, but to understand their place. A subtle, sometimes explicit reminder that they existed to uphold the royals' authority, not to form friendships or alliances. Challenging a royal's behavior, reporting misconduct, or even expressing frustration felt almost unimaginable. The unspoken rule was clear. Obey, endure, and preserve the household's image at any cost. Disobedience could bring embarrassment, dismissal, or worse. Financial dependence magnified this control. Many staff had climbed from low-ranking positions to trusted household roles over decades. Leaving meant losing not only a paycheck, but housing, pensions, social networks, and a sense of purpose tied to royal service. Even minor errors could draw harsh criticism from the royals, reinforcing that silence was often the safest path. The stability and benefits of palace life acted as invisible chains, keeping staff compliant long after simple loyalty might have faded. Institutional protection added another layer of restraint. The palace's hierarchy, strict protocols, and loyal senior officials created a nearly impermeable shield around the family. Security officers, administrators, and experienced household members all participated in maintaining order and protecting the royals' image, making the idea of speaking out seem futile. Misconduct could persist in private because the system itself prioritized the family's reputation above all else. The combination of loyalty, fear, and institutional protection fostered long-term silence. Even troubling behavior could go unnoticed or unchallenged for years, leaving staff to endure hardships in quiet isolation. Obedience became second nature, a survival strategy in a world where questioning authority risked personal and professional ruin. Staff witnessed misconduct, cruelty, and entitlement up close. Yet, their voices were largely confined to whispers behind closed doors. Within this carefully controlled environment, The royal household was insulated from scrutiny while those closest to the family were trapped between duty and conscience. Every act of loyalty reinforced the cycle, creating a system where power went unchecked and privilege dominated. Prince Andrew's true nature has finally been exposed. So, could there be other secrets about him still hiding behind royal doors? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.